Ladies and gentlemen, today I want to challenge an idea that has quietly held millions of English learners back for years. It is not your vocabulary, it is not your grammar, and it is certainly not your intelligence. The real obstacle is a habit so common that most people never question it. They translate every single word before they understand it. Think about that for a moment. While a native speaker hears a sentence and understands it instantly, your mind is running a race between two languages. By the time you've translated the first few words, the speaker has already finished the sentence. That's not because English is too fast. It's because your brain has been trained to take the longest possible route. The good news is these habits can be changed. Your ears can be trained. Your brain can learn to understand English directly without stopping to translate every sentence into your native language. And the moment that happens, English stops feeling like a school subject and starts becoming a language you truly live in. The biggest mistake almost every English learner makes is believing that understanding English begins with translating it into their native language. It feels natural because that is how most people are taught in school. A teacher says an English sentence, students immediately search for the meaning in their own language, and only then do they understand what was said. This habit becomes so deeply rooted that even after years of studying vocabulary and grammar, people still cannot follow a fast conversation. They know thousands of words, yet they freeze when someone speaks naturally. The problem is not their intelligence or their memory. The problem is that their brain has been trained to take an unnecessary extra step every single time they hear English. Imagine someone throws you a ball. If you stop, analyze the speed, calculate the angle, and think about where your hands should move, the ball will already be on the ground. Catching the ball requires immediate reaction. Listening to English works the same way. Spoken English moves quickly. There is no pause between every word to give your brain time to translate. Native speakers are not translating English into another language before understanding it. They hear the sound, recognize the idea, and instantly understand the message. Their minds connect sounds directly to meaning without using another language as a bridge. Every time you translate, you create a delay. You hear the first word, search for its meaning, remember the equivalent word in your own language, build a sentence in your mind, and only then continue listening. Meanwhile, the speaker has already moved on to the next sentence. This delay keeps growing until eventually lose the conversation completely. Many learners think people speak too fast, but often the speaker is talking at a perfectly normal speed. The real issue is that the listener's brain is working twice as hard as necessary because it is processing two languages instead of one. Think about how children learn their first language. No one teaches them by translating every sentence into another language. A child hears the word water again and again while seeing water, touching water, drinking water, and asking for water. Eventually, the sound itself becomes connected to the object. There is no translation happening. The brain builds a direct relationship between the word and its meaning. That same process can happen with English. Even as an adult, your brain is still capable of creating direct connections between English sounds and English ideas. Instead of asking yourself, what does this mean in my language? Begin asking, what picture does this word create? When you hear the word mountain, don't search for the translation. Picture a mountain. When you hear running, imagine someone running. When someone says, the baby is sleeping, see the image in your mind instead of translating every word. This simple change trains your brain to understand English visually and conceptually rather than through another language. At first, this feels uncomfortable because your brain has relied on translation for years. Breaking that habit requires patience. There will be moments when you feel slower than before because you are refusing to use your old shortcut. In reality, you are building a much faster system. Every day that you practice direct understanding, your brain becomes slightly quicker at recognizing familiar sounds and connecting them with meaning. Over time, what once required conscious effort becomes automatic. One of the most effective ways to build this skill is by accepting partial understanding. Many learners panic when they miss one unfamiliar word. They immediately stop listening and try to figure it out. During that time, they miss the next 10 words as well. Strong listeners do something different. They keep listening. They focus on the words they know and allow the overall meaning to become clear from the context. Understanding every single word is not necessary for understanding the message. Even in your native language, you occasionally hear unfamiliar words, but you still understand the conversation because your brain focuses on the bigger picture. Another powerful habit is speaking simple English to yourself throughout the day. Look around your room and silently describe what you see using easy English sentences. Think about your plans in English instead of your native language. Name objects, describe actions, and create small observations. These simple exercises teach your brain that English is not just something to study, but something to think with. The more often you think directly in English, the less your mind depends on translation. Remember that fluency is not built by collecting thousands of translated vocabulary words. Fluency is built when English becomes familiar enough that your mind no longer asks for permission from another language before understanding it. Every conversation you hear, every podcast you listen to, every movie you watch, and every sentence you think in English is strengthening that direct connection. Little by little, the voice in your head that constantly translates begins to disappear, and in its place grows a new ability to hear English, process English, and understand English naturally, making listening faster, smoother, more confident, and far more enjoyable. One of the biggest reasons people struggle to understand fast English is that they simply don't hear enough re-English on a regular basis. They spend months memorizing vocabulary lists, studying grammar rules, and completing exercises, but very little time is devoted to training the ears. Learning a language is not only about what your eyes read or what your hands write, it is about what your ears recognize automatically. If your ears are not trained, every conversation feels like a test. Every sentence sounds too fast, and every speaker seems impossible to understand. Think about how children learn their first language. Before they ever read a book or study grammar, they spend thousands of hours listening. Every day they hear the same sounds, the same expressions, the same rhythm, and the same pronunciation. Their brains slowly begin recognizing patterns without anyone explaining the rules. They are not translating, they are absorbing. That is exactly how you should approach English listening. Your goal is not to understand every single word. Your goal is to expose your brain to English so often that it begins recognizing familiar sounds naturally. Consistency is far more powerful than intensity. Listening to English for 3 hours once a week cannot compete with listening for 20 or 30 minutes every single day. The brain learns through repetition. Every time you hear common phrases, your mind strengthens the connection between sound and meaning. What once felt confusing slowly becomes familiar. What once sounded incredibly fast begins to feel normal because your brain has heard those patterns hundreds of times before. Many learners make the mistake of choosing listening material that is far above their current level. They open advanced interviews, complicated documentaries, or rapid conversations between native speakers and expect themselves to understand everything. After a few minutes, frustration takes over, confidence disappears, and they conclude that their English is not good enough. The problem is not ability. The problem is choosing material that gives the brain no opportunity to build confidence. Start with content that challenges you without overwhelming you. As your listening improves, gradually increase the difficulty. Another important habit is listening to the same audio multiple times instead of constantly searching for something new. The first time you listen, you may understand only a few ideas. The second time, more words become clear. By the third or fourth repetition, your brain begins predicting what comes next. This prediction is one of the secrets behind fluent listening. Native speakers are not processing every sound individually. Their brains recognize familiar language patterns instantly because they have heard them thousands of times. Pay close attention to connected speech. In real conversations, people rarely pronounce every word perfectly. Sounds blend together, words become shorter, and entire phrases flow like one continuous sound. A beginner expects every word to be spoken separately because that is how English is often taught in textbooks. Real English is different. What are you doing often sounds completely different from the slow classroom version. I want to becomes I wanna, becomes gonna. The more authentic English you hear, the more natural these patterns become. Do not panic every time you hear an unfamiliar word. One unknown word should never stop you from understanding an entire sentence. Strong listeners focus on the overall message instead of chasing every detail. Imagine watching a movie. Even if you miss a few words, you still understand what the characters are feeling, what they are trying to achieve, and where the story is going. That ability comes from following context instead of obsessing over perfection. Create English around your daily life instead of treating it as a separate subject. Listen while walking, exercising, cooking, commuting, or doing household tasks. These small listening sessions add up over weeks and months. The more frequently your brain hears English, the more familiar the language becomes. Eventually, your ears stop treating English as something unusual. It becomes another normal sound in your environment. Choose speakers with clear pronunciation before moving to faster accents. Build a strong foundation first. Confidence grows when your brain experiences success. As your listening skills improve, introduce different accents, speaking speeds, and conversation styles. This gradual progression teaches your ears to adapt instead of becoming dependent on only one voice or one type of English. Active listening is equally important. Sometimes pause the audio and repeat what you hear. Mimic the speaker's rhythm, pronunciation, and pauses. This exercise strengthens the connection between listening and speaking, because the brain learns more effectively when it hears and produces the same sounds. Even reading along with subtitles for a short period can help connect written words with their natural pronunciation before listening again without subtitles. Progress in listening is often invisible at first. Day after day, you may feel like nothing is changing. Then one day, you suddenly realize you understood an entire conversation without translating. A podcast that once sounded impossibly fast now feels comfortable. A movie scene that was once confusing suddenly makes sense. Those moments are not accidents. They are the result of hundreds of small listening sessions that quietly trained your ears until understanding became automatic. One of the biggest mistakes English learners make is believing they must understand every single word before they can understand the whole message. This belief creates fear every time they listen to fast English. The moment they hear one unfamiliar word, their attention stops. Instead of following the conversation, they become trapped trying to figure out that one word. Meanwhile, the speaker continues talking, and they miss the next sentence, then the next idea, and soon they feel completely lost. The truth is that communication has never worked this way. In your native language, you rarely pay attention to every individual word. Your brain naturally collects clues from the surrounding words, the speaker's tone, facial expressions, and the overall situation to understand the meaning. That is exactly how you must train yourself to understand English. Imagine watching a movie where someone rushes into a room with a worried face and says, "Well, I have to leave now. There's no time." Even if you miss one or two words, you immediately understand that something urgent is happening. Your brain doesn't stop to analyze every sentence. It captures the situation. That is the power of context. Context allows your mind to fill in the missing pieces without needing a perfect understanding of every word. Successful English learners develop this ability, while struggling learners remain trapped in the habit of translating isolated words. Think about how children learn their first language. Nobody hands them a dictionary. Nobody explains every sentence. They listen, observe, and connect words with real life situations. After hearing the same expressions again and again in different contexts, their brain naturally understands what those words mean. They learn from patterns rather than translations. Adults can develop the same skill if they stop treating English like a school subject and start experiencing it as a language used in everyday life. Your goal should not be to catch every word. Your goal should be to understand the message. If someone says, "The meeting has been moved to tomorrow because the manager isn't available today," you do not need to examine every grammar rule or translate every word. You only need to understand the important idea that the meeting is tomorrow instead of today. Real communication is about meaning, not perfection. This is why listening practice should focus on complete ideas instead of isolated vocabulary lists. When you hear the same words repeatedly in different conversations, your brain begins recognizing them automatically. At first, you may only understand 30% of what you hear. After consistent exposure, that becomes 50%, then 70%. Eventually, your brain starts predicting what comes next because it has seen the same language patterns so many times. That prediction ability is one of the hidden secrets behind fluent listening. Stop becoming frustrated every time you hear an unfamiliar word. Instead, ask yourself a different question. What is happening in this conversation? Who is speaking? What emotion do I hear? What are they trying to accomplish? These questions force your brain to focus on the overall picture instead of getting stuck on tiny details. Ironically, the less you obsess over individual words, the faster your overall understanding improves. Another powerful habit is to accept uncertainty. Many learners panic whenever they don't understand something immediately. They believe missing one sentence means they have failed. Fluent listeners don't think this way. They stay relaxed because they know more information is coming. Often the next sentence explains the previous one. Sometimes the speaker repeats the idea using different words. Sometimes the situation itself makes the meaning obvious. Confidence grows when you stop demanding instant perfection from yourself. The human brain is designed to recognize patterns. Every conversation you hear strengthens those patterns. Common expressions, sentence structures, pronunciation, and rhythm gradually become familiar. This is why listening to real English every day is far more valuable than memorizing endless vocabulary lists without context. Words learned in isolation are easy to forget. Words connected to real conversations become part of your long-term memory because your brain attaches meaning, emotion, and experience to them. Every time you listen, resist the temptation to pause after every sentence to translate it. Keep listening. Allow your brain to follow the flow of the conversation. At first, this may feel uncomfortable because your mind is leaving its old habit behind. That discomfort is not failure. It is evidence that your brain is learning a faster and more natural way to process English. Over time, you will notice something remarkable. Instead of hearing separate words, you will begin hearing complete ideas. Instead of translating every sentence, you will simply understand what people mean. That transformation does not happen because you memorize thousands of new words. It happens because you trained your mind to trust context, recognize patterns, and focus on meaning rather than individual vocabulary.